The untold story of Wreck-It Ralph. What really happened? Most of you may have heard of Wreck-It Ralph and Fix-It Felix, but have you heard the story of what happens when Ralph isn't able to save the game? Well, I have. And now I can never watch the movie the same way again. Today, I'm going to tell you that story. And I'm going to share with you the dark alternate universe where Ralph was left alone to be unplugged. Just like in the movie, Ralph leaves to go get his medal. After receiving the Medal of Heroes, he makes his way back to his game. After entering the apartment condo and sitting patiently for what seemed like hours, he realized no one was coming. And maybe the apartment folks were right. He's just a destroyer. He's just a wrecker. But what Ralph didn't know was that Felix was searching for him. And as the sun rose, the inhabitants of the game grew weary, sensing the inevitability of their game being unplugged, and many of them became depressed. Felix realized there was one place he forgot to look. The original game. How stupid of me, he thought, to check back home. He raced back through the surge protector with all the energy he could muster. He reached the entrance to their game. With bated breath, he began to enter when he realized, shit, it was too late. He could see the back corners of the game beginning to disintegrate. They were already unplugged. And as the pixels of his home began to deteriorate, he noticed a shadow in one of the windows to the condo. Oh no, oh no, oh no. He screamed with everything he had, and he called to Ralph to get out of there. It was of no use. When Ralph came to the window and he looked out at Felix, Felix could see it in Ralph's face that it had already begun. It had already started. Ralph's hands were deteriorating, and Ralph had a defeated look on his face. But he looked out at his friend, and he yelled to him one last time. I'm bad, and that's good. I'll never be good, and that's not bad. Felix watched in horror as the deterioration spread through Ralph's body, completely erasing him. It was at that moment that something in Felix broke. I'm supposed to be a fixer. I'm supposed to be able to fix things. But I couldn't even fix my friend. And it was at that moment that Cubert saw Felix's face. And he realized something was wrong, and he went to comfort. All the tenants of the apartment in their game surrounded Felix, bowing their heads. I wrecked it, Felix said in a gruff voice. The sound was so random and rough that they all stood for a second, wondering if they heard him right. He looked at Cubert, and in one dark sentence, he explained the reason for his depression. Ralph was still in there. Cubert, along with all the other toons, gasped in horror. And then Cubert began to speak to Felix in his little language. Felix spoke back in a rough, angry series of blurts and beeps, growing more and more angry. It was then that he lifted his hammer and brought it down over and over and over again on Cubert. The other game inhabitants began to scream and flee from Felix. See, what you don't know is that dying outside of your game means that you die for good. And Cubert's game had been unplugged years ago. This act changed Felix's hammer, turning it into something dark and wicked, a stark contrast to the shiny gold hammer it once was. Being that it was peak gaming hours, all the other game toons were in their games performing as they should. So there was no one to witness or help in this horrifying display of grief. Felix looked around at the other toons. "This is all your fault," he said with such malice that they all leaned back as if he had physically lashed out. All he wanted was cake, and a place to sleep, and to have friends. He began to get more and more angry. He lifted his hammer, which was now blackened and bloodied, with cracks in it where red light seeped out. And without warning, Felix slammed his hammer into the ground. Red light ran across the ground in cracks and tears. The ground burst open and the game toons fell through the floor. "Bonus level," he said with an evil grin. And he stood there, and he stared through the destroyed floor, and he watched as the other toons fell through the crevice and began to smack themselves against the sides of rocks that jutted out, destroying limbs and pixelated hands. They fell into what looked like molten liquid lava beneath the floor, and they began to scream and wail, their agonizing voices mutating into something otherworldly. Felix slid down into the crevice and into the rupture, finding a place to sit amongst the sharp stones and crushed rocks. He looked out at this horrid scene, and he said with a dark smile, "I think I like wrecking things."